So what about the professors? I know you can't speak for all the professors at all the universities all over the place, but everyone sees this thing happening. We see it every day, a different school with another one of these incidences. Are professors talking about this stuff? Is there any movement by faculty to fight it? I mean, what's going on there?
So this has been really fascinating. This is, so here's the situation. The professoriate has leaned left, certainly since the progressive era. And in the 20th century, I've been collecting data on this, me and my colleagues. In the 20th century, it was basically 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 left to right. And that's fine. You can, we don't care about equality. The key thing is what's called institutionalized disconfirmation. If somebody says something, there has to be somebody on the other side who's going to say, wait a second, that makes no sense. So that's the way it always was in the 20th century.
Right, so 2-to-1, you're okay with that ratio?
Oh my God, if we could get to 4-to-1, I would be so thrilled.
Right, it's not. It's closer to what, 5-to-1 now or something?
No, it's 7-to-1 overall, but 5 or 6-to-1 overall. But almost all the conservatives are in engineering schools, business schools. If you look at the core areas of the university, so the humanities and social sciences, it's 10-to-1 or 20-to-1.
Wow.
And once that happens, the few that are not on the left go into the closet. So the key thing that everyone needs to keep in mind is that almost all professors are on the left, but they're not illiberal. So you've got, the key thing to keep in mind is what's happened here is the illiberal left. I guess you call it the regressive left.
I'll go with illiberal for our purposes.
The illiberal left is a small, not tiny, but it's a small portion. And then the liberal left, because liberals traditionally believed in freedom of speech, freedom of thought. So the illiberal left has everybody else scared, and it's the students overwhelmingly, because the students, everyone's afraid of the students. The students are afraid of the students, professors are afraid of the students. So the illiberal left make these demands, they march into the president's office, they demand this and that, they accuse everybody of racism and sexism. And because everybody's on the left and everyone's afraid of the students, nobody stands up. So when the Christakises at Yale, Christakis, so within 3 days, there was a giant petition, 500 Yale professors backing the students. Well, I had one of my research assistants find out what departments they're all in. It was gender studies, film studies, English, it was that stuff. So the humanities are they're totally on board with this. The humanities are full of illiberal leftists. Mm-hmm. 4 weeks later, a small petition, 40 names, mostly STEM, mostly scientists. So the natural scientists are still liberals. They believe in openness, they believe in debate. So that's what you have to keep in mind. The problem comes out of the humanities, the social sciences are in the middle, and the question is, where does the illiberal left have such dominance that the professors are afraid to speak? And I started a group called Heterodox Academy, me and a law professor, Nick Rosenkrantz. We got together and we realized, wow, we got the same problems in our field. And so we just started getting together people who were willing to say something about it. And it's been thrilling because we're right. People, if you're listening, please go to heterodoxacademy.org. We've been writing, we've been talking about this, and nobody's objecting. Nobody is saying we're bad people. Nobody's saying we're wrong, because professors are largely afraid, and a lot of them are thrilled that we're speaking up.
Is higher education politically liberal? The answer is clearly yes. In virtually every field within academia, the great majority of professors identify strongly with both leftist causes and the Democratic Party. Renowned sociologist Seymour Lipset was one of the first to examine this question. Based on a number of surveys taken since World War II, Lipset concluded that academics are more likely than any other occupational group to identify their views as left or liberal. Professors tend to support a wide variety of egalitarian social and economic policies. They're far more likely to vote for Democratic candidates, and in many cases back leftist third parties. While Lipset based his conclusions on faculty surveys from the 1950s through the early 1980s, more recent studies show that the professoriate's commitment to leftist politics has only strengthened. In our book, The Still Divided Academy, my colleagues April Kelly-Wessner, the late Stanley Rothman, and I take an in-depth look at faculty views at the beginning of this century. Consistent with earlier studies, we find that a mere 12% of professors see themselves as Republicans. But even this statistic is deceiving. Among the small minority of faculty who call themselves Republicans, 51% are pro-choice, 63% support more environmental regulations, even though it could cost people their jobs, and 39% of Republicans believe that the government should work to reduce the income gap between the rich and the poor. So not only are there relatively few Republicans in the ranks of the faculty, but many of the Republican professors hold views that are identical to Democrats outside of academia. Based on the best evidence, fewer than 1 in 10 professors hold conservative social, political, moral, or economic views. Although college professors are overwhelmingly on the left, there are big differences in the political values of faculty depending on their field. Dan Klein, a professor of economics at George Mason University, and his colleagues conducted an in-depth study of 6 academic disciplines: anthropology, economics, history, philosophy, political science, and sociology. Within these fields, faculty backed the Democratic candidate over Republican candidates by a ratio of 15 to 1. The left's advantage was most lopsided in anthropology and sociology, where Democratic faculty voters outnumbered Republican voters by approximately 30 to 1. In political science, faculty support for the Democrats over Republicans runs only 7 to 1. And in economics, the ratio is a mere 3 to 1. On the surface, then, it certainly appears that the odds are stacked against college students receiving anything but a left-wing indoctrination. But the picture is not so grim as it might first appear. In the battle for ideas, conservative professors don't need to be equally represented in a discipline to have an impact on the students they teach. Whereas sociology or philosophy students may never hear a conservative perspective, most economics and political science departments have at least one, and often more than one Republican on the roster. Even in leftist academia, there are islands of non-leftist thought, provided students who do not want to receive only one view of the world know where to look. Given academia's overwhelmingly left-wing bias, what effect does this have on the students' thinking? The evidence is somewhat surprising. According to my research, students who enter conservative tend to remain conservative, and students who enter liberal tend to remain liberal. Conservative students, if they look for conservative professors, can often find some, and liberal students can easily go through 4 or more years at the university having never heard a conservative idea. Ironically, therefore, it's not conservative students who suffer as a result of this overwhelmingly liberal bias, but liberal students. They rarely, if ever, have their views challenged. And if the point of college is to expose students to diverse worldviews, then college experience for liberal students is sadly lacking. And what about students who enter college without any formed ideology? They're also shortchanged by higher education's liberal bias. These students are pushed toward a left-leaning worldview in large part because that's the only perspective they've ever been offered. Ideally, higher education should be about expanding students' minds by subjecting them to new ideas and testing their assumptions. That's exactly what most conservative students experience, and that's exactly what most liberal students don't. And that's a shame. I'm Matthew Wessner, Associate Professor of Political Science at Penn State University, Harrisburg, for Prager University.
People entirely consume information that is nothing but confirmation bias. And I wouldn't even...
See, what happens then is that amplifies their temperamental proclivities.
Right.
And we have research showing this too. So conservatives do tend to consume media that fosters a conservative viewpoint, and so do liberals. And so one of the ways, I mean, this was the whole purpose of education at one point, is to expose you to views that contradicted your own, and to help you find value in those alternative views.
Yeah.
And the reason for that was to help you get out of your confirmation bias and the tendency of that to augur you into a narrow viewpoint that is no longer representative of the world.
Right.
It's really a bad thing when that happens. It's like you're a celebrity that's completely surrounded by sycophants who only tell you what you want to hear.
Exactly.
What happens is that because you're not getting any corrective information anymore, your weaknesses don't get corrected and they start to take you over.
Right.
Now, and that's exactly what's happening in our polarized political landscape. It's like the weaknesses of the radical left viewpoint are starting to predominate, to dominate the entire spectrum on the left side of the...
Yeah, I think it's already dominated the left for a long time, and now unfortunately I see it permeating the right a little bit, where they're willing to cannibalize themselves just because you're critical of one action of Trump. And that really worries me in the United States.
Yeah, well, the thing about criticism is, for a political leader, is that criticism can be a really good thing, because if you're a good critic, you don't only say why the person is wrong, you offer some alternatives that might be better, and you force them to sharpen their arguments. And people think of criticism as insult, something like that. And that criticism is, here's a way that you could have done that better.
Right.
And you want that. You want criticism from other people. I mean, it's hard.
I think you do, and I think I do. And what's sort of ironic in all of this is that we used to say the fringe, sort of your left, my right. The fringe left, their left. So it's okay. I know you're a very educated man. I'm doing it for them. your left, my right, and then the fringe, my left, your right. But really, that's mainstream left and right now. They aren't fringe. And it seems like in the middle is what would once have been called the fringe. I don't consider myself a moderate, but I find much more common ground with you than I do many Republicans, certainly nearly all liberals, in just being a critical thinker. That seems like we're a shrinking minority to the point where we would really be considered more fringe than someone with a Trump sign and a funny hat, or a social justice warrior who has a snowflake t-shirt and is crying in the corner.
Well, that's a consequence of polarization, right? Because when things polarize, then viewpoints become increasingly black and white, and they become increasingly simple. And the problem with that, like, I think it was Einstein who said that an explanation should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. And political beliefs should be like that too. They should be simple as possible, but no simpler. And the thing about political beliefs is they're not beliefs about statements of fact about the world. They're beliefs about how to move forward and to solve problems. And the real test of a political belief is, can it specify a problem? And then can it solve the problem? And the way that we practice those political beliefs and their formulation is through dialogue and critical dialogue. And the critical dialogue is, well, here we've got a bad representation of this. You have a bad representation of it, a poor representation, and so do I. So let's keep, that's what we're doing right now. Let's keep talking about it until our model of the problem is more and more and more detailed. And then maybe we can start to generate some solutions. And then maybe we can start to agree on those solutions and implement them and test them.
If you like the video, smash that like button. If you don't like it, leave a comment explaining why. If you have nothing to add,
ZeroFox given.